My dear friends, let me introduce myself. I'm Chaim Levi, 78 years old, born in Kishinev, that old town in Moldova where the winters bite deep and the summers hum with life. I left for Israel back in the 90s, carrying stories in my heart like stones in a pocket. I've seen so much in my time, families rising and falling, loves that endure, and those that fade like smoke. Today, I want to share a tale that's close to my soul, one about a marriage that seemed solid as the ancient walls of Jerusalem, but cracked quietly after 50 years. It's the story of David and Sarah, simple folks like you and me, and it carries a truth from our traditions, the kind whispered over a Sabbath table. Listen close, because what happened to them might echo in your own home. Picture this. David stands frozen by the window of their little apartment in Kishinev, the one they've called home for decades. His hand trembles as he clutches a chipped teacup, the very one they used for Friday night blessings. Sarah, his wife of 30 years, moves about the room like a shadow, packing a small bag with quiet determination. No words pass between them, just the soft rustle of clothes and the tick of the old clock on the wall. Suddenly, she pauses at the door, her eyes meeting his for a fleeting moment. Then, with a sigh that seems to carry the weight of years, she turns the knob and steps out. The door clicks shut. David calls after her, "Sarah!" But his voice cracks in the empty air. The cup slips from his fingers, shattering on the wooden floor. Why today? After all these years of shared meals, shared prayers, shared silences? His heart pounds like a drum in the night, confusion washing over him like cold rain. David sinks into a chair, staring at the pieces of porcelain scattered like broken promises. He remembers their mornings, her brewing tea, him mending clothes at his tailoring table. But lately, those moments felt hollow, filled with talk of bills and weather, never the deeper things. Fear grips him now. What if this is the end? He picks up the phone, dials their son Israel in the city. "Papa," Israel says, his voice heavy, "you and Mama haven't really spoken in ages. It's like you've built a wall between you." David's mind races back to the room. On the side table sits their old Torah, open to a verse about words being like birds. They fly away and don't return. He hadn't noticed it before, but now it stares at him accusingly. Why did their conversations dwindle to nothing? And why, after the children left and life quieted down past 50, did this silence turn into something poisonous? He rummages through a drawer and finds Sarah's journal, tucked away like a secret. Flipping through, he sees her words, lonely entries about feeling unseen, unheard, even in their own home. Each page deepens the mystery. Had he missed the signs all along? The apartment feels colder now, shadows lengthening in the corners, as if the unspoken words have taken form, lurking like uninvited guests. As the evening light fades, David sits at their Sabbath table, the cloth still laid from last week, candles unlit. 30 years, he thinks, through wars, moves, joys, and losses. They built a life together, raised Israel and Rachel under this roof. Yet here he is, alone, the emptiness pressing in. What went wrong? How did the quiet companionship they once cherished become a barrier thicker than any wall? He wonders if he can bring her back, mend what's frayed. The central riddle burns in his chest. This silence that crept in so slowly, was it just habit or something more, a quiet killer of the heart? If he listens to the old wisdom, the kind our rabbis teach about families being like tents that must stay open to the wind, maybe there's a way. But he knows now, deep down, this isn't just about one argument or one bad day. There are hidden truths in a marriage after 50, truths that flip everything you thought you knew. 3 mistakes, like drops of water wearing away stone, that can unravel even the strongest bond without a single shout. David rises, resolve hardening like bread in the oven. He can't let this stand. Grabbing his coat, he heads out into the chilly Kishinev streets, determined to find Sarah at her sister Rachel's place on the edge of town. As he walks, the wind whispers doubts, but he pushes on. In his pocket, he slips that old journal page he'd torn out, her words about needing to be heard. Little does he know, this step will pull him into deeper waters, forcing him to face the first echoes of what really broke them. But that's for later. For now, hold on, my friends. The story unfolds slowly, like a prayer at dusk, revealing layers you never expected. David stepped into the dim street, the Kishinev night wrapping around him like an old coat. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of baking bread from a nearby home, reminders of lives going on while his felt suspended. He walked briskly toward Rachel's house on the outskirts, his mind a whirl of memories. Sarah's laugh during their early years, the way she'd light the Sabbath candles with such care, her hands steady and sure. But those images blurred now with the sting of her absence. "I have to make this right," he muttered to himself, clutching the journal page in his pocket like a talisman. The road seemed longer than he remembered, each step echoing his growing resolve. Rachel's door loomed ahead, a modest wooden frame with a mezuzah nailed to the post, the same one where they'd gathered for holidays, sharing stories and songs. David knocked firmly, his heart thumping. After a moment, Rachel opened it a crack, her face etched with concern and a touch of wariness. "David, what brings you here so late?" He explained in halting words, pleading for Sarah's whereabouts, his voice thick with emotion. Rachel hesitated, her eyes searching his. "You've always been the strong one, deciding everything for the family," she said, softly. "But Sarah, she's hurting." David pressed on, recalling a line from the Talmud they'd all heard at services. "Families are like tents, open and sheltering, not closed fortresses." Something in his words touched her. She sighed and relented. "She's at the old pension by the river, the one with the willow trees." "Go easy, David. Talk to her. Really talk." With that small victory, hope flickered in him like a candle in the wind. He thanked her warmly, feeling for the first time that perhaps he could bridge this gap. As he turned away, the weight lifted slightly. This lead felt like a key, turning the lock on their troubles. Maybe one honest conversation would bring her home, mend the tear in their shared life. The walk to the pension seemed lighter now, the stars above whispering that things might yet be salvageable. By the time David reached the pension, the moon hung high, casting silver light on the quiet building. He spotted Sarah through a window, sitting alone by a small table, staring out at the river. Gathering his courage, he knocked on the door to her room. She looked surprised, but let him in, gesturing to a chair. They sat awkwardly at first, the space between them filled with unspoken years. David started gently, asking about her day, sharing a memory of their first Sabbath meal together, simple bread and wine, but full of promise. Sarah's face softened, a small smile breaking through. "I've missed that," she admitted, "the way we used to share everything." He nodded, feeling the warmth return, like sunlight after rain. They talked about the children, the grandchildren, even laughed a bit about old neighbors. It seemed so natural, so right. This must be the turning point. David thought, if we can just keep this open, like our tent in the desert, we'll weather this. As he left that night, promising to return soon, optimism swelled in his chest. The control he'd always held over plans, over decisions, faded in his mind. This felt like progress, a real step toward healing their bond after all these decades. But as the days passed, that fragile hope began to crack. David returned to the pension the next afternoon, carrying a basket of fresh challah from the bakery, hoping to recreate a bit of home. Sarah welcomed him, but when he suggested she come back and let him handle the apartment repairs, her expression shifted. The air grew heavy, like before a storm. "David, she said, her voice steady but edged with pain. "You've always done that, decided for us. The house, the money, even what we ate on Fridays. I felt like a guest in my own life." He blinked, stunned. How could she see it that way? He'd only wanted to protect them, to keep things steady after the children left and life settled into its quieter rhythm past 50. But her words hit like a wave, and she went on. "It wasn't just silence between us. It was you holding the reins so tight I couldn't breathe." The basket sat forgotten on the table, the challah cooling, untouched. In that moment, the illusion shattered. David pressed for more, and Sarah revealed what he'd never suspected. She'd dreamed of traveling, of visiting Israel together, but his firm plans always overrode her wishes. "You controlled the little things, thinking it was love," she whispered. Then came the blow that raised the stakes sky high. Rachel had confided in her about Israel's struggles too. Their son, always the peacemaker, had pulled away from family gatherings, whispering to his wife about how his parents' marriage made him fear his own. "It's not just us anymore, David," Sarah said, tears welling. "Our choices are breaking the whole tent. Israel, the grandchildren. If we don't change, we'll lose them all." David's world tilted. What he'd seen as stability was a cage, and now it threatened everything. The pension room felt suffocating, the river outside mocking their fragility. He left in a daze, the hope from before turning to dread. This wasn't a simple rift. It was a deep wound, festering for years. Desperation clawed at David as he wandered the river path that evening, the willows drooping like weary sentinels. He couldn't lose his family, not after building it brick by brick. Remembering Rachel's words about openness, he sought out old Rabbi Aaron, the man who'd married them decades ago. The rabbi listened in the dim light of his study, surrounded by books of Torah and tales. "Control is a rope," Aaron said gently, "meant to guide, but it can strangle, if not loosened. In our tradition, a husband and wife walk side by side, not one leading the other by force." David nodded, a new plan forming in the fire of his resolve. He would release his grip, offer Sarah true freedom, perhaps even suggest separating finances, letting her choose their path. It terrified him, this leap into the unknown, but passivity had brought them here. He returned to the pension the next day, heart pounding, ready to confront the habit that had quietly eroded their love. The confrontation unfolded in the pension's small garden, under a sky heavy with clouds. David sat across from Sarah, laying out his offer. "I'll sign over the accounts, the decisions about our home, whatever you need to feel free." She listened, eyes wide, as he admitted how his need to steer had blinded him to her voice. For a moment, victory seemed within reach. Sarah reached for his hand, murmuring, "This is a start, David. Maybe we can rebuild." They talked late into the afternoon, planning a simple trip together, no agendas. Hope surged again. This bold move had cracked the wall. But as the sun dipped low, Israel arrived unannounced, summoned by Rachel's worried call. Seeing his parents there, he exploded. "Papa, you've always run everything. Mama's been suffering, and now I'm paying for it in my own home." The words hung like smoke, and Israel stormed off, leaving David hollow. The win had cost him his son's trust, the family tent fraying at the seams. That night, back in the empty apartment, David collapsed at the table, the challah from days ago now stale. He'd pushed forward with everything he had, only to watch it unravel worse than before. The silence roared louder now, his control exposed as the second stone weighing down their marriage. Israel wouldn't answer his calls. Sarah sent a note saying she needed time. Everything, wife, son, the life they'd woven, slipped away like sand. Despair settled in his bones, heavy as the winter snows of Kishinev. Was there any light left in this darkness? The unlit Sabbath candles mocked him from the shelf, their wicks cold and untouched. He buried his face in his hands, the weight of loss crushing him completely. My friends, in moments like these, even the strongest hearts falter. But hold on, for the story turns yet again, revealing paths we never see coming. The night stretched endlessly for David, the apartment a tomb of regrets. He sat motionless at the table, the stale challah crumbling under his fingers like the fragments of his life. Waves of sorrow crashed over him. Sarah's distant gaze, Israel's angry footsteps fading away, the family tent collapsing under the weight of his unseen burdens. "What have I done?" he whispered to the empty room, his voice breaking. 50 years of marriage, and it all led here, alone in the quiet, the silence not just a companion, but a judge. Memories flooded in unbidden. The early days of laughter, the hardships they weathered together, even the small hurts he'd buried deep, thinking time would heal them. But time, he realized now, only hardened those wounds if left untended. Despair wrapped him tight, a heavy blanket he couldn't shake. Surrender tempted him. Perhaps it was too late, the threads of their bond frayed beyond mending. He glanced at the Sabbath candles on the shelf, their wicks dark and cold, mirroring the chill in his soul. In that lowest moment, with tears blurring his vision, David felt utterly lost. The man who'd once held his world together, now adrift. Then, like a spark in the gathering dusk, something shifted. David's eyes fell on the old Torah volume nearby, its pages worn from years of quiet reading. He hadn't opened it in months, but now a verse caught him, about forgiveness as the light that scatters shadows, the kind our ancestors spoke of after trials in the desert. Pieces clicked together. The silence hadn't started with words unsaid. It grew from old grievances, like the argument over moving to the city 30 years back, when he'd dismissed Sarah's fears without a kind word. The control? It stemmed from his own buried pain, the loss of his parents young, making him grip tighter to what remained. And Israel's distance? It echoed those unhealed rifts, passed down like an unwanted inheritance. The epiphany hit him gently but firmly. The third stone in their marriage was this refusal to forgive, not just each other, but themselves for the flaws that made them human. Holding on to those hurts after 50, when life slows and truths surface, was like letting a stone sit in the heart, growing heavier with each passing season. "Forgiveness isn't weakness," he murmured, echoing Rabbi Aaron's teachings. "It's the flame that warms the tent anew." With that understanding, a new plan took shape, bold and vulnerable. He would return to Sarah not with demands or fixes, but with open hands, confessing his part, seeking her pardon, and offering his own without condition. It was his last chance, risky as walking blind into the night, but the only path left. Hope flickered, small but steady, pulling him from the depths. The next morning dawned gray and misty over the river, but David moved with purpose. He gathered simple things, a loaf of fresh bread, a bottle of wine for blessing, and the old prayer shawl his father had given him. Heading to the pension, he asked the keeper to set up a small table in the garden, like their Sabbath gatherings of old. When Sarah appeared, hesitant in the doorway, he invited her to sit without a word of pressure. "I've come to listen," he said simply, "and to share what I've carried too long." As they broke bread together, the conversation flowed haltingly at first, revisiting the pains of silence, the chains of control. But David steered it deeper, admitting his fears from youth that made him hold on so fiercely. Sarah listened, her face a mix of surprise and old sorrow, but she didn't pull away. The stakes climbed as clouds gathered overhead. She spoke of her own resentments, the times she'd felt invisible, and how those built walls neither could scale. "We let the hurts fester," she said, voice trembling, thinking they'd fade like morning fog. David nodded, the garden feeling smaller, more intimate, as if the willows leaned in to hear. Just when vulnerability threatened to overwhelm, Israel arrived, drawn by a quiet message from the keeper, his face stormy, ready for another clash. The confrontation peaked there in the garden, the three of them circled like a makeshift minyan. Israel unleashed his frustrations. "Your marriage poisoned ours, Papa. Always deciding, never bending." Sarah reached for her son's hand, but David stepped forward, his voice steady for the first time in weeks. "You're right, my boy, but it's more than that. We've all held stones in our hearts, unforgiven words, unspoken pains." Drawing on his revelation, he turned to Sarah. "I forgive you for the times I felt pushed away, and I ask you to forgive me for building this cage around us. After all these years, past 50, when life asks us to let go, I see it now. The light comes when we release the weight." The words hung in the air, raw and real, as a light rain began to fall, pattering on the leaves like tears long held back. Sarah's eyes filled. She whispered her own forgiveness for his stubbornness, for her withdrawal, embracing the moment they'd both dreaded. Israel watched, tension easing from his shoulders, then joined them, the family knot tightening once more. But the path wasn't smooth. Doubts lingered, and Sarah revealed quietly that the stress had taken a toll on her health, a shadow over their joy. In that instant, with the rain mingling their tears, David used his insight fully, guiding them to a shared prayer, wrapping the shawl around all three like a protective tent. The climax broke like the storm clearing. They chose to rebuild, not as before, but wiser, the unforgiven past dissolving in the downpour. Victory came, hard-won and clear, no more walls, just open space to heal. In the quiet aftermath, as the rain tapered to a drizzle, the garden held a fragile peace. David helped Sarah gather her things, Israel carrying the basket with a tentative smile. They returned to the apartment together, the air lighter, though the scars remained, a reminder of the cost. Weeks turned to months, and life reshaped itself slowly, like dough rising in the warmth. David and Sarah spoke more freely now, over tea in the mornings or walks by the river, airing old grievances without the old defenses. The silence that once divided them became a bridge filled with stories of their youth and dreams deferred. Israel visited often, bringing his family, the grandchildren's laughter echoing through the rooms like a balm. David changed most of all. He joined Rabbi Aaron's study group, sharing what he'd learned about letting go, his tailoring hands steadier from the inner calm. Sarah, too, bloomed, planning that trip to Israel they'd always talked about, her voice carrying new strength. Their marriage after 50 wasn't perfect, but it was renewed, the three mistakes, silence, control, unforgiveness, laid bare and left behind like shed skins. One evening, as the sun set over Kishinev, they sat by the window, the same one where it all began. David held Sarah's hand, the teacup hole between them, and together they lit the Sabbath candles. The flames danced, casting a warm glow that chased away the last shadows. In that light, their world felt vast again, a tent open to whatever came next. My dear friends, such transformations don't happen without the heart's quiet work, but when they do, they light the way forward. Back in the warmth of their apartment, the days following that rainy garden talk unfolded with a gentle rhythm, like the steady flow of a familiar river. David and Sarah moved about the home with a new ease, sharing chores and stories without the old undercurrents of tension. Israel came by more often, his family filling the rooms with the chatter of little ones, mending the threads that had frayed. The Sabbath table, once a place of quiet strain, now hummed with blessings and laughter, the candles burning brighter as if fed by their shared relief. David looked at Sarah one evening as they sipped tea by the window, her hand in his, and thought, "At last, the storm has passed. Our tent stands firm again." Peace settled over them like a soft shawl, the hurts of the past, seeming distant, resolved in the simple act of coming together. It felt complete, a chapter closed with grace. But in the quiet hours, as the apartment slept, David found himself staring at the ceiling, a nagging whisper stirring in his mind. He replayed the moments, the shattered cup, the garden embrace, even the joy of reconciliation. And a sudden clarity pierced through, sharp as a winter dawn. It wasn't Sarah's silences or his controls that started it all, nor the unforgiven slights that piled up like stones. No, the true adversary had been inside him from the beginning, his deep-seated fear of vulnerability, that hidden shadow he'd carried since losing his parents young, making him armor his heart against any crack. This fear had whispered to him over the decades, turning small doubts into walls, urging him to silence emotions to avoid pain, to control decisions to stave off chaos, and to hoard grudges rather than risk the openness of forgiveness. After 50, when life strips away the busyness and leaves you bare, that fear had grown unchecked, reflecting back in every choice, every quiet moment with Sarah. The marriage didn't crumble from outside winds. It eroded from this inner battle he never named. With this realization, the whole story reshaped in his thoughts, tragic and tender all at once. The journal pages he'd found, not just her loneliness, but mirrors of his own unspoken fears. The confrontation with Israel, an echo of David's reluctance to show weakness, passed down unwittingly. Even the garden victory felt bittersweet now. The release came only when he faced that core dread, letting vulnerability in, like light through a tent flap. Sarah, sensing his unrest one night, sat beside him and shared her own parallel struggle. Her withdrawals stemmed from a fear of rejection, mirroring his. "We fought shadows of ourselves," she said softly, thinking they were each other. The weight of it humbled David. Without this truth, their peace might have been fleeting, the 3 mistakes recurring like seasons. But in acknowledging it, he found a deeper freedom, the stone in his heart dissolving at last. And in that moment, my friends, David's tale stopped being just one man's journey through the valleys of marriage. It became a mirror for all of us who've walked those paths after 50, when the years reveal what's truly at the root. What if the greatest foe in your own home isn't the partner across the table or the circumstances that test you, but the unseen fears you carry within, fears that quietly shape every silence, every grasp, every held grudge? The answer to that, the key to lasting light in the tent of life, waits just ahead in this story's heart. But what happened to David and Sarah in the weeks that followed wasn't the end of their path. It was the beginning of seeing it all in a clearer light, the kind that comes from looking inward after the storms have cleared. You see, my friends, the real power of their story lies not in the happy turns or the mended bonds, but in why such troubles brew in marriages after 50, when the children are grown and the house quiets down. Have you ever paused in your own quiet moments and wondered why the person you've shared decades with suddenly feels like a stranger? Or why those small habits, unspoken words, old routines, lingering resentments start to feel like chains? That's the thread running through it all, and I've carried this understanding from my own life in Kishinev to the hills of Israel, watching families like ours face the same shadows. Let me share it with you now, as if we're sitting together at my table, because what I'm about to unfold is the sort of truth many overlook, yet it holds the key to keeping your tent standing strong. Listen closely. After 50, when life peels back its layers and leaves you with just the essentials, 3 quiet mistakes slip in like uninvited guests, eroding the foundation without a single loud argument. The first is that creeping silence, like a word that's become a bird. Once released, it flies away, never to return, leaving emptiness where connection once lived. We think it's just the comfort of routine, but it starves the heart, turning partners into roommates. The second is the habit of control, a rope meant to steady the journey but tightening into a noose, where one leads and the other follows, forgetting that true partnership walks side by side, open to the winds of change. And the third, oh, the heaviest, the refusal to forgive, those small hurts piling up like drops of water, carving a stone into the heart, hardening what was once soft and yielding. But here's the deeper law of life, the one our sages hint at in the Torah without spelling it out. It's all born from that inner fear of vulnerability we each carry, the shadow that makes us cling to the familiar path, even when it leads to isolation. David's world didn't fall because of Sarah or fate. It trembled because he and she repeated this pattern, fearing the risk of true openness, until they faced it head on. And you, in your own marriage, walking those later years, might see the same cycle playing out, subtle as a whisper, pulling you into the same quiet drift. So, as the candles flicker on your own table tonight, ask yourself, which of these paths have you tread too long? The silence that hides your heart, the control that dims the light, or the unforgiven stones weighing you down? And what one step could you take to loosen their hold, inviting the warmth back in? Think on it, my friends. Stories like David's, drawn from the wisdom that has guided our people through generations, we explore right here, ones that shift how you see your life and the ones you love. To catch the next tale that might light your way forward, you know the way. Stay with us and let it unfold.